welcome to Dungeon Master Talk, a podcast specifically for Dungeon Masters. I am your co-host, Dungeon Master Shea.
And I'm Kyle, your other co-host. And thank you all for joining us today. And if you're here, odds are you were volunteered, nominated, voluntold, bamboozled into becoming Dungeon Master for your group. So what do you need now? Well, you're on this great journey. Congrats, by the way. You won the lottery. You get to be Dungeon Master. They just elected you God of their campaign world.
It's true.
And so you're going to need a couple things. Shay, do you want to start us off?
Well, first of all, you're going to need a lot of caffeine. You are going to need a lot of imagination. And then, I'm just kidding. I don't want to freak you out. But here's the things that you probably should have when you're starting a Dungeon Master campaign. First of all, as the Dungeon Master, obviously, you need to have a story plot, right? You have a story in your head that people can come alongside of you and create characters to fulfill that plot, okay? That's kind of the preemptive set of things that you need to have as a Dungeon Master, right?
Yeah, it's really key if you're going to be Dungeon Master, even if you don't know your story, hopefully you have a goal in mind. Like, do you want to tell a fun Lord of the Rings style adventure, or are you thinking more of like, we're going to role play out our own version of Hogwarts, we're just going to call it something else. Like, so hopefully you at least have this idea in your head coming in. But if you don't, fortunately for you, and we'll touch on this more later, there is some stuff out there for you to pull in. But really, to get going, at the bare minimum, I think ultimately what you need is a copy of your character sheets and dice. And really, that's, if you have that, and honestly, you don't really need copies of the character sheets if you're trying to really vanilla this. Pen and paper can do, but I find that having at least printed off copies of the sheets to just uniform that so you can help your players out finding their stats, and your players can help each other out finding their stats, and they get used to reading it. And then as long as you have, the base set of dice, that D20, D8, D12 percentage die, aka the D10s, D6 and D4. I think I listed them all. I wasn't really keeping track there. If I missed one, audience, please forgive me. But if you have those, you're set to go.
Oh, come on. You don't roll D30s?
I do own a D30, but not for Dungeons & Dragons.
I have a D30. I don't know why I have it, but I have a D30.
I honestly don't know why I have one either, but I have one. I've never rolled it for a game, but I own one.
Something else you're going to need, Kyle, is a player's handbook.
Yep.
As a Dungeon Master, if you can, there's two other books that are very, very helpful. You have the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is basically what it says. It kind of helps you flesh out the idea that we just kind of talked about, right? So when you have a story, you have a world, you have cities, you have people, you have, creatures that you're going to need to build habitats for. That book will kind of help you flesh all of the terrain and the histories and the deities and all that other stuff out. But then also you have one of my favorite books, the Monster Manual, because here there be monsters. Let's just be honest.
Shea, in his free time, just listens to the Monster Mash and reads the Monster Manual on repeat. That's his great secret in life.
And the best part is I have a desk job, so that's it. I get to do that a lot. So
hopefully your employers never listen to this podcast.
No, that would be a great conversation. I would love that conversation. But also, those three books would be, for those of you who are kind of newer to Dungeons & Dragons, that's kind of the core three books that you would need as a Dungeon Master. Bare bones, if you just have a character sheet, a set of dice, and a player's handbook, you can use your imagination for the rest of it, honestly.
Yeah, it does help tremendously, though, if you can, to get a copy of the Dungeon Master Guide Monster Manual. Great thing is, and if your playgroup's okay with it, you do not need multiple copies of these. The player's handbook can be shared on the group. I personally love that when you come to play, you have the player's handbook in the middle of the table. It can be passed around. And then really only the dungeon master needs to see the dungeon master guide and the monster manual. So if you know that you have your group of friends and you're going to be adventuring for a long time to come, and maybe you're going to rotate who that DM is, coming together as a group and saying, hey, let's all pitch in for the DMG, the Dungeon Master Guide, that is probably the most worthwhile purchase I could see a group coming in for. That guide, it can help you build your own world. It can help you build out that history. It helps you learn how the difference between strictly saying this is the story and actually just creating the world with motivations and influences and past events that help drive your NPCs so that your players can really uncover their version of the story and not your version, not necessarily your version of the story.
Right. And to kind of piggyback on that too, like it kind of helps them figure out their niche in the whole world. Like, I know when Kyle was building the world for the game that we're playing in, I had asked him a little bit about the history of it, but basically what I went and did is I wrote a backstory, and we'll actually cover this in another episode, but I ended up sending him about an 8.5 page backstory of this whole ecosystem and this whole thing that I had made for my character, which included cities, it included like the region, and then he was able to take that and kind of piece that into his realm and figure out, okay, how can that work into my story, and how can we incorporate this character along with the other characters as well.
So I gave Shea he asked me for cities in this region, and I gave him a city, and he had asked me for plural, and so he's like, hey, really for the backstory I had in mind, I need another city. And he's like, do you have another one? And I was like, really, I don't yet. If you want to make one, like if you want to name one, I will fill it. And I was like, I'm in the mood for filling cities right now, but I'm working on this other region. So and
at that point, I basically just said, hold my beer and watch this.
Right. And he named the city. He gave me a little stuff in there. And then from what he sent me, I blew up that whole region. I went from having a city and like a loose concept for this part of my world to having fleshed out that entire continent and determining that I wanted, again, and you guys will hear me talk about this is a way I break things up. It's not a way everybody does. But the second season, aka the second story arc of my campaign, to entirely take place on this continent that originally was going to be a side mission thing to allow Shea to introduce a character that felt at his core different from the other characters introduced. And so it blew up into, now we're going to do the entire, like, next, I don't know, probably 100 sessions together in this area solely because he gave me a city I didn't plan.
And y'all can't see me doing this, but I'm like shaking my head furiously. I'm like, yep, we are definitely going to be doing this. That's absolutely true. One of the other things, Kyle, that sometimes DMs like to do and some don't, is have a battle grid on the table and have little miniatures to represent different characters, monsters, and you can draw out things. That helps me a lot because I can help my players kind of have a visual of what I'm trying to tell them. Where Theater of the Mind is great, and that works in my opinion, it works to the extent. But when you get into combat, you have, 4, 5, 6 different people doing a bunch of different things. By the time you get back around to you've probably forgotten at least half of those. So
right,
having that little like on the table representation kind of in my mind helps not only you but the players kind of understand where you're coming from, and that way it's a little bit more interactive that way as well.
And this is something that Shea and we've disagreed on in the past before, and in a way I'm coming around. I enjoy D&D a lot more in my head than I do in any form of visual representation of it. And I get that that's easy to say here in this medium that we're talking to you guys right now, podcast world, where we have no visual with you guys other than the button that you press to start this podcast and then the description notes. But when you're in D&D together or remotely, I am starting to come around to the fact that Theater of the Mind is a part of every session. Visual representation needs to be a part of every session too, because it really helps everybody's theater of the mind, which is innately just going to be different because each of us bring our own perspectives to the table, virtual or not. And that visual representation helps us connect our different theaters of the mind around center points. And this really got nailed down for me in a recent session when 3 times in the middle of play, we had to correct someone's action because we're like, no, that person's not there anymore. They moved. And so we now, even though that's not how my mind works best, it is having this map out. I work a lot better. And again, it's easy to say that over the podcast, or maybe all of you are like, Kyle's an idiot. Of course you need a map.
But I love you, Kyle, so you're not an idiot.
Thank you, Shea. Getting that map put together, and you do not have to. This was my biggest holdup on it, and this is why I really want to say it, and that's the point for my big soapbox here, which I will get off. You do not have to be an artist. You do not have to be this amazing drawer. I cannot draw a straight line longer than an inch to save my life, even when I can trace that line to do so. But even a crude visualization is better than no visualization, and your players will thank you and appreciate your effort. And so that I've noticed in my session since I started trying to do more visual representations, it runs smoother. And it allows the theater of the mind to get deeper, because now my players are putting their input into it because they have that center point that, even in the case of me drawing a crude visual, to really get involved.
I totally agree with that. Now, Kyle, I'm gonna throw this in there too, because this kind of ties in mostly with the maps things. My players do not live in the same city as me. Now, most of our group, the one that you run, actually do live in town with you, even though I am out of state. But a lot of my team is either in a different city in the same state or completely not in the same region. So for me, I like to use a kind of a tech platform called Roll20. I know there's a bunch of other different mediums for being able to do that type of platform, but basically what it does is it's basically a technology-based, map that you can put tokens on for your monsters, your PCs, etc., and that will kind of again give you a basis. And obviously, you guys probably know what that is because you watch a lot of like online real play time, recordings, because they will show maps and they'll do some of that on Roll20, and every group's different. But like, I know that's helped me as a DM be able to kind of reference for my players what I'm talking about and not just make them have to remember every little word I had just said. That's
really the beauty of the time we lived in. And it was, most of this existed beforehand, but honestly, a good thing, and it's good to talk about the good things, but good things that have come out of the pandemic is the evolution of the online resources available for tabletop games, and D&D is no exception. And the D&D-like games that this podcast can also help with are no exception. Roll20 is an awesome resource, even if you're not remote. And personally, I don't leverage it as much as I did back during the pandemic. Well, I guess we're not technically out of it, but during the heart of it when everyone was big time remote. But Roll20 is an awesome source, and other tools like it for digital map making, sharing your screen. And I'm sure we've all drooled long and hard over those Pinterest pictures. The people that make the awesome board tables that have the screens in them that you can show your maps on. Technology is something that is abundant now for these tabletop games. I personally heavily leverage one called D&D Beyond. Qualifier, I have not purchased a single book through D&D Beyond. I love having the physical book in my hand. But every encounter I run for my campaign, I store in D&D Beyond. It also helps me tremendously with judging difficulty level. Although, take that with a tiny bit grain of salt, my team of players has easily survived a couple encounters that D&D Beyond said it was certain death. And their hardest battle ever was one D&D Beyond said they would just laugh at. And so there is obviously just those weird things that happen, but it's pretty solid on a encounter builder that helps you out if looking at those encounter tables doesn't really click for you mentally like it did for me.
Kind of circling back to our initial premise of having an idea for your campaign, right? So if you get to the point where you're like, yeah, I can't really think of an idea or a story that I really want to do. And I know, Kyle, you have your way that you got us started, and I'll let you talk about that here in a second. But one thing that I would encourage you to do as a new DM, if you're brand new, is to get a pre-generated campaign or a pre-gen as you'll hear us call it. And you can have good stories. Like my group right now is running through the Princes of the Apocalypse story, which I am loving a lot as a DM, and even as a player, I would love it because it's just so much fun. Or there's one like Horde of the Dragon Queen, which is one of my favorites as well. But what that does is it gives you a story that you can basically study. You can study something that has been published by Wizards of the Coast, and it gives you plot hooks for your characters that they can at least have an idea of what they want to bring into this. But also it gives you monster stats. It gives you maps that you can kind of redraw on your grid on your table. So if you're really brand new and you're struggling for an idea, I would either skim through a book like that to give you inspiration, or if you can pick that book up and study it and read it, I would totally recommend doing that for a little while. And then once you feel comfortable enough to start building your own encounters and building your own stories, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that as well. Now, Kyle, I know in our game, you've kind of done a hybrid of both of those, so I'll go ahead and let you kind of expand on that.
Yeah, so Shea touched on this pretty hard. I've made this no secret in my group. To start us off, because I was a brand new green, as you would, DM for this group, and we started off, there was 7 of us, and we were getting going. And so what I did is I bought the starter kit. And now if you go and look at this, it does not, out of the box, allow for 7. So immediately we had to do some tweaking.
Now, time out. That does mean 7 counting the DM for new players.
Correct.
That is 6 players and the DM. So,
yep.
Just to keep that as a sorry to interrupt, but...
No, thank you for clarifying that. Otherwise, we're going to get lots of questions because they're going to be like, hey, you said you only had to add 1?
Yeah.
But 5 plus 1 is
quite
6.
add up.
Yeah, I promise you I'm not that terrible at math. But
I am.
Yes. So I got the starter kit. Sorry. I'll edit that
Starter
out.
child?
Yep. So I got the starter kit, which is the Lost Mine of Phandelver. Is the story there. And it's a great story. It was a lot of fun. And my players probably played through like 90% of very closely related to Lost Mine of Phandelver. With a 10% alteration that I made to introduce this into a world that I was building. And so I did this, and I went into it with that in mind, that, hey, I'm buying this to get us going, but every god that's not outright mentioned in this campaign, I'm actually scrubbing from lore, and I'm moving the Swords Coast onto my pre-made world, and everything else we're going to follow this until the very end, which I will alter and let it speak into our world. So I don't want to say more than that in case people are like, I really want to get into Lost Mine of Phandelver spoil free, but highly recommend doing that. It gave, for my party's composition, we had 5 players who were pretty unexperienced and 1 very experienced player, which was Shea. Of those 5, I had 1 who had previously played a good amount of D&D, but it was, I think he said 3 edition. 3 edition. I said that really.
Or 3.5. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, I think it was 3.5 that he said he played. And then I had another who had played a couple one-off sessions, mostly like the fun alter world of D&Ds. Like think Rick and Morty, but that wasn't one of them. And then another player who had listened to a lot of D&D podcasts, but had never played. And then 2 that had no exposure. They knew what it was, but they hadn't listened to D&D in any medium, haven't sought it out. And so that was our comp. And honestly, starting with those pre-made character sheets, and I gave them carte blanche to change up backstories and make any edits if they so choose. But 2 of them pretty much stuck to the character sheet. Shea rolled his own character, but we made sure that he was in line with those pre-printed character sheets. And then the others, like 1 really altered his character. 1 played it true until we were past level 5. And so it's it was really fun, and it got us going out the box without too much trip ups because we were all very new to our roles.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of touched on this too. A lot of the pre-gens, like the pre-gens will tell you this story is for characters levels 1 to 5. Like Minds of Foundover is 1 to 5, I think. Correct?
Yep. Following through that, at the end of it, your characters will be level 5
or completely botch everything and just dig a hole in the middle, whatever. But like the one I'm running right now, yep. The Princes of the Apocalypse, that one goes from 1 to 15. Now, we might go past that. We might not. We'll see when we get there. I hope we do. My goal for this group, and I've told them this, is we are going from level 1 to level 20. That is the goal. I mean, not very many groups usually get past 10 for those of you who are still getting new to D&D and stuff. So, and we'll talk more about that in another episode, but that is the goal, that we will actually outlast the book that we are using. And eventually I will use this book as a launching platform, assuming I have my way, and the characters and the PCs want to keep playing to go to that level 20.
Well, and one thing I really wanted, before we move on to our next talking point, for any of you out there that are brand new to being a DM, I don't want you to make the mistake that I did and buy this kit and look at the booklet, which is, grand scheme of things, it does not look huge. Mm-hmm. It looks fairly small, and so you look at that and you go, oh, that should only be a couple sessions. I want to stop you there, because it took my group, and for a while we were playing pretty regularly, it took my group a couple years of once-a-month sessions to get through Lost Mine of Phandelver. So when you hear, a lot of playgroups don't make it past 10, if you're truly sticking to the experience that you get from encounters and roleplays, that's a pretty solid length campaign to get to 10 or 15. If you're playing only by like 4-hour sessions once a month, like we are. So that's something to keep in mind, is the time that it takes to play these out versus like the time it takes to get through a story. It's a lot more than what you think. And
also keep in mind that when we talk about sessions 4-hour sessions, you're also assuming that the players will do exactly what you have planned out, and they will follow the script that they have no idea what it is to a T.
Yep.
And then you get this one guy that goes this way and another guy goes that way, and you're like, well, now we're going to have to stop or, redirect and bring everything, make sure that the story stays congruent. So that plays into it too. Now, do people do it on purpose? Sometimes. Do people...
Yeah, every group has a Shea.
Every group has a Shea, yes. But sometimes it's within the story, like it's a side quest that means something to this character, or if a shop owner says something that rubs the paladin the wrong way and he smites the shop owner, well, now the paladin goes to prison and blah, blah, blah. Well, now you got to play that out too. So there's a lot of variables that go into this.
Yep.
But I think the biggest thing...
And we're only talking here about the variables that are the people. Sometimes the dice just don't like you.
There's that too, but we'll definitely touch in that in another topic. But the big point I'm trying to drive home is like, just take your time, let the story kind of go as it goes. There are going to be times where you do a lot of role play. There are going to be some times where they're just going to be fight. But the story will progress as the story progresses. And there's no real way to make it do what you want to do, because you have multiple players, multiple variables involved.
Right. At its core, D&D is group storytelling. You, the DM, you have a very important role. You are creating the world. You are creating the essential conflict that will drive the characters together. But that's it. That's where your influence on the story really ends. Your players have the entire control of the protagonists. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but every book that I read is heavily driven by the protagonist. So you might build this world and you might have this great idea, but the truth of it is the players have more control over the story than the dungeon master. I think so, because they're going to determine how.
We might need to discuss that. We might need to discuss that one in a different topic. And I'm not bashing you, man. I'm thinking like, I think I can present a case that's.
And that's different. What I love about this. And we told you guys in episode 0, Shea and I are not going to agree with each other 100% of the time. Shea might be one of those guys that will No, I'm joking. So you as the dungeon master, you have a lot of control. But if your players are just like if you, and I've done this, I have spent hours writing for an event to happen and the story to go wrong one way, only for my players to just be like, nope, our characters, we don't think they care about that. We're going to instead spend 3 play sessions arguing in a bar over an action that one of the players took.
It's true. We did that.
Really, honestly, my advice to you as DMs is let that happen. Let it happen. Those are my all-time favorite sessions. I sat back. I welcomed everybody to the table. I drank lots of beer those nights. And I listened and took copious amounts of notes. And really, that was my role. And a couple of times I had to coax a character to respond because I'd be like, hey, these two are talking you. How do you feel about this? Other than that, I sat back. And again, those are my all-time favorite sessions. Did it work for my story that I wanted as a dungeon master? No. Would I change it for anything? Absolutely not.
Now, Kyle, as we're talking through some of this stuff, and I know sometimes things can be not ideal, like people can't necessarily always get the resources that they really want to have or, need. But I want to encourage you as a newer DM or a returning DM, if you have players that are experienced, more often than not, they've either have like a player's handbook or they've been a dungeon master before and they have a player, a DMG or a monster manual that they might loan you to run those campaigns. So don't be afraid to ask your team, if you get voluntold to be the DM, don't be afraid to ask if you can borrow resources. Like if you need a mat, some of those mats can be fairly expensive. One of the things that I did once was I actually went to Walmart and I found an old, like a quilting mat, if you will, or but it was like made of cardboard. It was like a foldable one. And all I did was I just took some like erasable plastic and put it over the top of that. And that was my table mat. So I basically built a mat for about $5. It was pretty inexpensive. One of the fun things that I've done in the past is some of my villains, I have used like M&Ms or small candies. And so whoever gets the killer blow gets to eat the candy. So that kind of it kind of adds a little bit of incentive to the players so that they, they're like, oh, did I kill him? Did I kill him? Did I kill him? Drats!
That's a brilliant idea. And
I don't even remember where I got that. I think somebody else did it once and, I was like, oh, that is so cool. I want to do that.
You mentioned something. I just want to touch on it very briefly about borrowing books. For about a year and a half of me running my campaign, I had Shea's Dungeon Master Guide and Monster Manual. Didn't
you have my PHP too?
Yeah, I think I actually did have your player's handbook too.
Oh yeah.
So I had all 3 of my books, the PHP, the DMG, and the MM, the Monster Manual. They were all Shea's, and I just had them in my D&D stuff for well over a year. And then when Shea was like, "Hey, bud, I'm starting another play group," I was like, all right, I'll go buy my own now. But all my initial writing for my campaign, the notes I'm still using today, the vast majority of them were written with Shea's book on my lap. But he let me borrow those for a good amount of time while I was playing his group, and it made it super cost effective for me.
Oh, also, sometimes like people have like a PDF copy of those books. And I know that there's some like licensing and copyright things like that. So I don't want you to steal a copy of the book.
Definitely not.
But sometimes like if you can legally get a copy, like a PDF copy of the book,
like through D&D Beyond or something like that.
Yeah, like through D&D Beyond, like that would be a way to, have that book with you, and then, you don't necessarily have to lug a bunch of books around with you. I am old school like that, like Kyle is. I like having the feel of the pages. I find it faster for some reason. Don't ask me why. I just do. Yep. But yeah, that's just me. So, and honestly, like the biggest thing with D&D is what I found. It's kind of like once you buy kind of like the initial stuff, it's basically free after that. Because using your imagination is completely free,
Well, mine charges me 25 cents a thought, but that's personal.
Wow, that's expensive.
Right. That's why I don't have many thoughts.
Provoking your barbarian to smite somebody, priceless. Different things like that. So, and honestly, like the same books go for every campaign. You don't have to have a different book for a different campaign. Once you're in 5th edition, if you have the 5th edition core, you can run any book you want. Everything else after that, like Tasha's Cauldron of Everything or Xanathar's or all of that's just extra. If you want that, that's great, and those are fun. We can talk about those in another time. But if you have the core and a character sheet and a set of dice and a pencil, you're good to go.
And there's still people, like, if you're worried about, well, what about when the next edition comes out? Hey, it was years ago that 5th edition came out already, and it's still running.
2014?
Yeah, so 8 years strong. But there's still groups playing 4E and loving it.
Mm-hmm.
And so even once the next edition comes out, you can make that jump, and there's oftentimes fun reasons to do it. Like the reason our campaigns are 5e, at least the reason mine is, I don't want to speak for Shea, but the reason mine is I was like, hey, if I'm going to start this campaign with a bunch of new players, I want them on the stuff that's going to be the most readily available to them. And plus, me personally, 5e just jives for me. It's like how my brain wants this game to be ran. Mm-hmm. And so it really works. But there's players, and Shea will talk your ear off about 4th edition. He loves it.
Kind of.
Well, you used to. Maybe you're converting. But
well, yeah. I know 5th edition very well. Like, I know 5th edition not necessarily to, like, the experts level, but, like, that's the edition that I know the most. Now, granted, one of my favorite story podcasts is in 4th edition, so I have learned quite a bit about 4th edition. But my center of D&D realm is definitely 5th edition. So I do sometimes pull from 4th edition, and like I said, that could be another topic too at some point, like kind of go through the old editions. But I will say that 5th edition for brand new players, and especially brand new DMs, is a lot easier to understand. And a lot easier to jump in than some of the previous editions, at least in my opinion. So on that note, guys, thank you for listening to us rant and ramble about supplies and becoming the DM when you kind of got voluntold to be. I tell you, it is a privilege. I have enjoyed being the DM for my group for the last year, and I've appreciated Kyle being my DM for the last almost 3 years now. Going on. But we want to hear from you guys. If you guys have any questions or comments or stories about becoming a DM for the first time, please email us at dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com. We would so love to interact with you and hear those stories. And again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know a lot of you guys are listening to this while you're at work, or you're cleaning your house, or waiting to pick up kids in the pickup line. We just super appreciate you spending that little bit of time with us this week. So for all of us here at DMT,
I am Kyle.
And I am Shea, and we will see you next time on Dungeon Master Talk.
Bye, guys.